They tell you that the view from the top is breathtaking. They promise that once you climb high enough, the air will be clearer and the world will finally make sense. I spent 20 years climbing. I ignored the ache in my lungs and the coldness in my heart, focused only on the next step, the next goal, the next victory. But now that I'm here, standing in the silence of my own achievement, I've realized something terrifying. The view isn't what matters if you have no one to share it with. I won the race, but I lost the reason why I started running in the first place. This is the lesson that didn't come from a book or a mentor. It's the lesson that carved itself into my soul, far too late to change the past. I remember the boy I used to be. He was full of fire, but that fire was blind. Back then, I believed that life was a puzzle to be solved, a series of boxes to be checked. I remember my friends laughing in the hallway, calling my name, inviting me to get lost in the magic of a summer night. I can still hear my mother's voice, asking me to stay for just one more cup of tea, to tell her about my day. But I always had an excuse. Not now, I would say. I'm busy. I'm working for our future. I'll be there next time. I treated time as if it were an infinite well I could draw from forever. I didn't understand that every no I said to the people I loved was a yes to a future of solitude. I was so busy preparing for a life I hadn't started yet, that I failed to notice the life I was already living was slowly slipping through my fingers. The first taste of success is like a drug. It blinds you. I remember the day I finally got what I thought I wanted. The office with the view, the title, the respect of people who didn't even know my middle name. I felt invincible. I thought I had finally reached the start of my life. I called my brother to brag, but the conversation was short. I didn't notice the silence on the other end of the line. I didn't hear the sadness in his voice when he told me that things had changed back home while I was gone. I was so intoxicated by the applause of strangers that I couldn't hear the quiet departure of the people who actually mattered. I thought that success would make me a hero in their eyes, but all it did was make me a stranger. I was buying the world, but I was paying for it with pieces of my soul that I could never get back. I was standing on my first mountain, unaware that the ground beneath me was already beginning to crumble. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a great storm. For me, that storm was my own ambition. One evening, I sat in a restaurant that cost more than my father earned in a month. I looked at the empty chair across from me and realized I had no one to invite. I checked my messages, hoping for a distraction, only to find photos of a family gathering I hadn't been invited to. They hadn't forgotten me. They had simply learned to live without me. That was the moment the floor fell out from under my feet. I had spent my life building walls and calling them security. I had traded the warmth of a brother's hug and the sound of my mother's laughter for a collection of cold, expensive objects. I thought I was winning the game of life, but I was playing on a board where I was the only player left. The success I had worshipped turned into a ghost, haunting me with the memories of every later that would now never happen. I had finally arrived at the destination, only to find that the person I wanted to be was left behind at the starting line. Success has a strange way of quietening your soul. When you finally have the money to buy anything, you suddenly realize that the things you truly need don't have a price tag. I surrounded myself with the best, the fastest cars, the finest silks, the most influential people. I wore my success like armor, hoping it would protect me from the growing emptiness inside. I spent hours at gala dinners, nodding to stories I didn't care about, shaking hands with people who only loved my bank account, not my heart. I remember looking in the mirror before one of those events. I saw a man who had everything, yet his eyes were searching for a door that led back to a time when he had nothing but hope. I was living a life that millions dreamed of, but I felt like a ghost haunting my own mansion. I started to wonder, when did I stop being the hero of my story and start being just a decoration in it? I was so afraid to admit I was wrong that I kept running faster, hoping that speed would drown out the voice in my head telling me I had lost my way. I thought I could just go back. I had this arrogant idea that the world stayed still while I was away conquering my mountains. I bought a ticket to the place where my heart used to beat, thinking that a few expensive gifts and a sincere apology could bridge a decade of absence. But when I stepped onto those familiar streets, I felt like a trespasser. The old oak tree where we used to carve our dreams was gone. The house I grew up in had a different color door and a different family's laughter echoing inside. When I finally found my old friends, I realized we no longer spoke the same language. They talked about their children's first steps, about the simple joy of a Sunday barbecue, and the quiet struggles of everyday life. I stood there in my $5,000 coat, feeling like the poorest man in the room. They had built lives. I had only built a resume. I wanted to tell them I was sorry, but the words felt heavy and useless. I realized then that you can't reclaim a seat at a table you abandoned years ago. The ghosts of the past don't want your money. They wanted your presence, and that is the one thing I had never given them. I returned to my tower of glass and steel, but for the first time, I didn't see a sanctuary. I saw a prison. I looked at the awards on my shelves, the plaques that once made my heart swell with pride, and all I could see were the tombstones of the years I had buried. I had sacrificed my sleep, my health, and every meaningful relationship for these pieces of metal and plastic. I had been so afraid of being ordinary that I forgot how to be human. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the sound of a life spent waiting for a someday that had finally arrived, only to find it empty. I realized that the man I had become was someone the younger version of me wouldn't even recognize, and worse, wouldn't even like. I had been chasing a ghost, a shadow of happiness, while the sun was shining right behind me the whole time. I sat there in the darkness, letting the weight of my choices finally crush me. Because you can't start building a real life until you admit that the one you've been living is a lie. I was tired of running. I was tired of winning. For the first time in my life, I just wanted to be still. If you are listening to this and you are still running, stop. Just for a moment. Look at your hands. Look at the people who call your name. Look at the sun setting outside your window. Don't wait for a heart attack, a divorce, or a funeral to realize that you are already rich. The lesson I learned too late is this. Success isn't a destination you reach. It's the quality of the journey you're on. It's the coffee with your brother. It's the walk in the rain. It's being present when someone says, "I love you," instead of thinking about your next meeting. I spent my life trying to buy time, only to realize that time is the only thing that doesn't have a price tag. I'm leaving the tower now. I don't know where I'm going, but for the first time in years, I know who is walking in these shoes. Don't build a life you need a vacation from. Build a life you actually want to live. Because the clock is ticking for all of us, and later is a lie that will steal everything you have. Live now. Love now. Before the lesson becomes the only thing you have left.